Yeah, are you gonna?
All right. Hey everyone, my name's AJ Reed. I use they them pronouns, and I'm also the Illinois Green Party co-chair as well as a former co-chair for Green Party of the United States. And with me is Garrett. Garrett, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Garrett Wasserman. I'm a new co-chair of the Green Party of the U.S. and I live in Pittsburgh. And I've worked on some reading groups locally, and so I'm excited to talk about it more.
Yes, and like Gary, I also have done a few reading discussion groups over my 10 years as an activist and organizer, and this is why we're doing this live stream right now to explain like why it's important for having this, as well as trying to talk a little bit more about developing all that. So without any further ado, let's just get right into that conversation about that political education piece. And we have Howie with us. Hey, Howie.
Hey, I was just planning on listening. You don't need to put me on camera.
All right. Well, I'm glad you can join us, Howie. So again, that political education piece, it's very vital whenever we're doing the work that we do as activists and organizers and political strategists. If there's a formula to any of this, there's like that education piece, and it doesn't matter what organizing training you go through or what have you, they're always going to tell you that education is vital. And when we talk about political education, we're not talking about what we've probably learned like in political science classes or what you learn in civics in high school. I mean, those are important for sure. But what we're talking about is, trying to get really into the crux as to just the thought, but how do we learn about things from either Marx or Paulo Freire or Rosa Luxemburg or whomever we're learning, and then turning those ideas into praxis, or in other words, those action pieces. Because it's one thing it's nice to have all these books and learn about these, but if we do not take these ideas and actually put them to action, and that action could be, developing a neighborhood food pantry, or it could be developing, a worker co-op in your neighborhood, whatever those things are, we need these ideas and put them into thought. And if Chris, if you go to the next slide for us. So when we talk about reading groups, the one person that we can point to is a person named Murray Bookchin. And I won't read everything that's on the slide. Those of you can read this, but the essence of this is the ones in bold. That the idea to have a reading group is having that discussion and study group as the first step to any revolutionary movement. And if we can look at the history of social movements, we know that a lot of people have done these readings and they have discussions and everything. They had discussions in their homes, discussions in taverns, discussions at the cafes and the streets. This has always been happening, and even during the Occupy movement, we had teach-ins at the General Assembly. After the General Assembly, there was always teach-ins because we thought it was even important even then during the Occupy movement that education is vital, because if we do not educate the people why the 99 cents important and why some of those demands that we were asking during the movement are as such, then they would have no idea why these things that we're talking about when it comes to democratizing the dollar, public banking, any of that stuff. If without that kind of education for the public, then those movements will cease to exist, at least in my view. So the study groups help create that solidarity and that shared language, as well as building for a mass organizing and political movement. And Gary, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I like the idea here of creating solidarity in a shared language. A lot of Murray's ideas actually ended up in kind of the basis of the Green Party and green socialism, green politics. And I think it's very important that when we're getting together on actions, and we throw around words very often like capitalism and socialism, and because of various readings and propaganda that we see, lots of people interpret those words in many different ways. And so reading groups are really important so we can come together and talk about the meaning of these terms and the understand it more deeply behind just what we read in newspapers or things like that. And it's really important we have that shared language and shared understanding so that we can actually build solidarity and build actions and movements together where we're all on the same page and we're all working toward a similar goal instead of being confused about what our goals are.
Right, and then to kind of add a little bit more to what Garrett just said regarding the shared language, along with Bookchin, another great intellectual that people learn about doing this kind of popular education is Paulo Freire. And even Freire has said, in order for the masses or the workers to understand, there has to be that common ground. So if the workers doesn't understand what they're doing for their work or why it's important to understand what the boss is maybe doing to them, then they're not going to mobilize the way they want to, particularly in Brazil at that time. And so, yeah, we have to have that shared language and even help those who need to have that understanding as to what do these ideas express and everything. And I gotta say, as someone who reads these kind of texts, I mean, even for myself, I'm like, okay, what does this mean? Like, what is Judith Butler saying? What is it? I like Judith, but can we bring it down to what the masses can understand and everything? And which is why we need to have that shared language. Next slide, please. So yeah, why a reading group? Again, we have to understand when we do readings, we have to understand about these issues and we have to understand these critical moments that are happening. And hopefully from there, we can start illustrate tactics and actions around these things, understanding the opposition as well. Because if we don't understand what the opposition's doing, then why are we even mobilizing at all? And I express this a lot when I do training workshops with other folks, that we have to understand the other side and provide readings for folks to illustrate these points. And we'll get into a little bit more about what these readings are, but just as a preview, readings don't have to be thick books. It could be an article. It could even be a zine, something that gets across relatively easily. If you want to do a book, then that's fine. We just have to really understand what those points are and everything. So with a reading group, this is something that's very important to do, and understanding, again, these issues so we can research these issues a little bit more critically and try to provide that reconstructive moment, linking those issues not only like in your neighborhood, but across the state, if not globally as well. Garrett, anything you want to?
Yeah, I think it's really important that there's a nice little graphic on the side here that talks about all these single issues: police brutality, borders, healthcare, houselessness, trans rights, living wages, violence against women. And what happens a lot with activism is people will get stuck on single issues, and that keeps us all kind of siloed and separate. And so what we're trying to do with reading groups is better understand not only these issues by themselves, but understand how all these issues are actually interrelated with each other, that they're all connected through capitalism, basically, and other forms of hierarchy. And we need to kind of understand the web of how all these things are related before we can really create these sort of actions that are in a more revolutionary mode, in a more reconstructing what society looks like, as opposed to just kind of dealing with the symptoms, right? Getting at the root cause of all of these issues. So, the more that we look at these issues and how they're related, the more we understand that root cause and understand what's going to be effective actions against the root cause. So that's why I think it's important for us to come together and read about lots of different movements and actions, both in the present, what's going on, but also in history. What have people done historically? What has succeeded? What has not succeeded so well? And to learn from those things and to keep building on it for better action.
Next slide, Chris. So when we talk about all these things up to this point, the importance of political education through a reading group or a discussion group, these next things we're going to be talking about is like how do we get these things started. And as someone who has developed a few over time, I'm there with you that it can be a little bit challenging as to what book do we want to read, where we want to do it, how often, and it can be that kind of dare I say uncertainty times, what to do with that and everything. But again, it doesn't. What we're going to provide are these templates. Work what's good for you and your group and everything. But what we're providing here are resources, and you can see at the bottom of the screen, there are even more resources on how to run a reading group. So check out that link to the greensocialist.net site and for more information. So if you go to the next slide, when we talk about planning that organizing meeting, and if this was non-pandemic times, this can be a little bit of a different conversation, but here we are. So again, when we talk about planning that first organizing meeting, whether it's in person in a safe way, or you're doing it on Zoom or whatever video conferencing platform that you're using, these are the things that you need to be doing. Pick your readings, choose a day and time that works, and stick with those days and times. For those of us who've done this for a while, I think we all know that if we have a consistent day and time, people are going to remember that a little bit more effectively, versus like, let's do it Saturday. Oh, how about we do it Wednesday? Oh, how about Tuesday at midnight? It's just not going to be as effective if we stick to one day and time, and again, location. And as I said, we're in different unique times now. So location may be key. It could be going to the park and maybe going to that nice little community hangout people go to that has like a patio. Again, it could be online, using Zoom or whatever video platform you would like to use. And then mailing lists. At a next workshop, we'll talk a little bit more on the marketing side, but, try to get some sort of idea what you want to do when it comes to some sort of mailing list and what platform you like to use. And then GSOP support. GSOP, for those of you who may not know, is the Green Socialist Organizing Project, and we have different resources you can go to with the link, as well as, we can help assist you as to what kind of help you with your mailing lists or help you with anything else you need to do, particularly with your first initial reading discussion group. But again, when we talk about these things, don't spend like less than 5 or 10 minutes on this. Really have that good first meeting. For me, 90 minutes is like the ideal time frame, because that gives you enough time to talk about a day and time, maybe a location, but it really gives you that enough time to talk about those readings. And Garrett, when you've done these before, how the groups that you're involved with chose those kind of readings.
It depended a lot on local conditions. I think when we got people together, there was interesting conversations about what was going on in the local area in Pittsburgh, where I live, for example. So there was interest in the issues that more directly affected them, and we started with talking about interesting things. With, in particular, I think last year. When we started, that was in the middle of Black Lives Matter that was spreading across the nation, and there was a lot of protests in Pittsburgh that were part of that movement. So, we started talking about police brutality and kind of linked it back toward, capitalism. And then it eventually grew into kind of a group where we started talking about alternative economics to the way that capitalism works today. We started talking more about grassroots democracy and issues like that. So I think one interesting thing about the way that these work is you kind of start with these local interests, and kind of like a few slides ago we were talking about, we start linking together all of these issues, and the group can kind of organically evolve into the interesting go in new ways. I guess I'm saying, right, that we start to link together all these different things, and you want to let the group kind of evolve naturally, so that people remain excited and they really want to get involved. And you'll start seeing people come to the meetings with their own proposals, like, hey, I found this cool article, how about we read this next week? And so you don't necessarily have to plan it all yourself. And actually, I think you're succeeding when you're not planning it all yourself, when people are so engaged that they're coming in with their own articles and their own ideas. That's really what you want to go for. But of course, in the first meeting, you have to have everything kind of planned out ahead of time so people know what to expect, and you can build from there.
Yeah. And if we go to the next slide, talking about just those chosen readings, right, as you just mentioned, I think it's very important to really have readings that are, as we said in the previous slide, about those critical moments. So when we had those like uprisings going on around Madison, Wisconsin, and elsewhere, I was with some groups as to like, okay, let's talk about why this is happening. So talking about articles, opinion pieces from Black Lives Matter activists and organizers. We talked about anti-racist texts as well, and why we're at this kind of critical moment and everything. Even now, if anyone's watching this, and a very critical moment right now is the abortion ban is happening in Texas. Picking these texts as to, let's talk about women's rights activists, and queer activists. There's a lot of good texts out there just on what's happening in Texas. So if we get some of those texts that could be very introductory, so people have an understanding why these issues are the way they are, but also to, like what Garrett said, let's choose something that's happening right now, and those can be very brief texts, or it could be a series of things. So yeah, I mean, if you are doing your reading group, you can do something very introductory for sure. And for me personally, an introductory series could look like, provide a series of text or articles that presents a certain theoretical framework, or a framework of ideas, so for me it could be Antonio Gramsci, Rosa Luxemburg, something by Fred Hampton, things, texts centered around that, the Zapatistas also, so that could be something, but again, it's all about your local, it's whatever your local needs and wants are and everything. So let's go to the next slide. So another thing, the idea about choosing those readings, and we'll talk about some of the groups a little bit later on here. But it could be just group discussion, but you can also use online voting platforms like OpaVote and kind of do like a ranked choice vote as to what your readings are also, So there are different democratic ways of choosing what your next text is going to be, So try to decide on that. So when we do each session, try to have an agenda, and we'll show you that agenda here in a second, as a template. But, before each session, have an agenda. It can be as formal and informal as you want it to be. A reading guide, which is not required, but just have some sort of guide as to, this is what we're going to be discussing and everything. So an example of that is I did a reading group around consent. So I provided everyone, here's the reading list, the zine about consent, and I chose a queer activist that talked about consent, and then I pulled some material from a clinic in Iowa City, the Emma Goldman clinic, that talks about consent as well. So like that was like our reading guide. That was a reading guide for that particular group. So it could look like that. And again, for marketing, if you have a Facebook event page, you can put your reading guide on there so people know before going in as to what the readings are going to be. And then, publicize it far and wide, use your social media, fly around town, talk to your friends, text your friends, just publicize it as far and wide as you can and everything. And I know we said we'll be very light on the publicity side of it, but Gary, what were some of the things that y'all did before when publicizing your first reading group or the series of reading groups you've had?
Yeah, I thought that social media worked pretty well, and we had a mailing list. Actually, there was a sign-up form that was made it really useful. You could use something like Action Network to create a form, and you could pass the link around, and the form actually has information about, here's the purpose of our reading group, and here's the day that we meet that's always regular so that people remember it. And here's kind of our upcoming readings, and you could click on the reading guides and see the next couple of readings so that people could kind of follow along with what happened in the past, what's coming up, and they could keep up with it. And those reading guides can be useful for, on an earlier slide, we talked about having a shared language. And I think the reading guides help with that kind of thing too, that as we're learning about new topics, there might be language that either we're not used to or maybe is even used differently from what you might see in typical newspapers or something like that. So that's kind of a moment where you can kind of help redefine things and help people think about stuff differently. So sometimes it takes a lot of practice. Well, not just sometimes, all the time. Anytime you're doing anything new, it takes lots of practice for you to get used to it and to understand. So the more often we can talk about the shared language and all, the more that we can learn from each other. Sometimes that's necessary, but be careful, of course, to know your audience. That if there's a bunch of new people, you don't want to dive too heavily into, really detailed theoretical academic stuff, right? And speaking of that, I just kind of want to mention that when we say readings here, it could be books and it could be articles, but it doesn't have to be academic articles, these journal articles that are really dense with all this theory and things like that. It could be something as simple as a magazine article or a newspaper article that's talking about current events. And then when your group gets together, we can talk about those current events within our framework from a Green Socialist point of view, stuff like, Murray Bookchin that we had mentioned before. What would be that lens on current events to get at the root causes and better understand it? So you can kind of think about all that stuff as you're putting together a reading guide. And of course, that's part of what the GSOP, what this is all about, right? Helping put together the reading guides, because lots of us have done this sort of thing before, so we can share what we've learned. What are the good tips at building the shared language and all. Go ahead, AJ.
Yes, and if we go to the next slide, and again, to reinforce Garrett said, yes, when we're talking about readings, it doesn't have to be, and I encourage folks not to go onto the academic side, because as someone who has to read that, because I'm finishing my master's up right now with that, academic language can be a little bit dense, and trying to break that down, can be a challenge at times, so choose readings that you feel is best, and if you do academic readings, I encourage all y'all to reach out to anyone that who may help you or the group better navigate around those kind of texts, because again, I can be challenging at times and everything. And then, yeah, so that's a very good point you made there, Garrett. So with this agenda, this is a sample agenda, it doesn't have to be the exact same times on here or what have you on here. So, again, this is something you can do, have some sort of like pregame. I call it pregame. I don't know why I call it pregame, but a pregame of those who are starting out with your session and everything. And that can be just texting or messaging each other back and forth to make sure everything's ready, making sure your video platform is working, what have you, making sure people have the readings and everything. And then, go from here. So, in this agenda, outside of the arrival and setup, this is a 2-hour session, so it can be 2 hours, and I would say no more than 2 hours. Just enough time just to get people settled into the reading that you're doing, the conversation you have, Q&A, and then, whatever you guys feel needs to resolve that session and everything. This is a schedule. And then, if you do an agenda like this, make sure you stick to whatever agenda you have. And if you need to make adjustments along the way, that's fine also. If we go to the next slide, it's also important when you do your reading groups. It's like even in a meeting, you need ground rules, because there are going to be times that some reading groups can be a little bit contentious, because all of us from different left backgrounds, we'll just say it, we come from different left backgrounds and we have different perspective on things, which means we need ground rules. And then these are some of the ground rules that I suggest you use. And I'm just looking through the comments right now, those who are watching, who are also in groups, check them out as well. I see Joshua Bradley is one of them. That's a good person to reach out to because they have a reading group with the Left Unity reading group. So even someone like that, reach out to and understand like what their ground rules are with that group. And as long as people listen to one another, actively listen to one another, and respect the person who's facilitating as well as, engaging in that conversation. Don't make assumptions during the group at all. Ask clarifying questions, because again, we're all here to learn. We're not here to say like, oh, Garrett's wrong. This is why you're wrong, Garrett. My idea is better than yours, Garrett. No, it's not that at all. I want to learn what Garrett's telling me. I may not agree with Garrett is saying, but I want to clarify as to what is being presented because we're all learning from one another. This is why we're doing this. And try to understand these arguments because, again, we're not only having reading groups to understand issues, we're also, and this is the other side of the education piece, we're also trying to really make sure we have our arguments down also, because as leftists, we really need to hone in those skills also. We need to hone in our critical thinking skills. We also need to hone in our persuasive skills, and learn from one another. I have learned from so many people who have made me a better person when it comes to like fighting the opposition or learning about other things, because without that, then we're not even going to move forward as well. Anything you want to add there, Garrett?
Yeah, I agree. It's not necessarily meant to be like a full business meeting, of course, but so you don't necessarily need to do the full Robert's Rules sort of thing. It's not parliamentary decision making or anything, but having a certain set of ground rules does help. If it's 3 or 4 people, you can have a conversation. If it's a room of 20 or 30 people, that's a bit harder. So, just out of respect and making sure that everyone gets an opportunity to talk, kind of follow a little bit of those sort of discussion rules that you might expect in a business meeting. One thing, I don't think it says it here, but one thing is to keep a stack, for example, that if people have comments, you can add yourself to the stack. So if you've never done that thing before, at the beginning of the meeting, you choose a facilitator, someone to kind of monitor the whole discussion. And they keep what's known as a stack. So when people have something they want to add, they'll ask, who wants to be on stack? You make a list of speakers and you put them in order. And then you say, okay, we're going to go in this order. And everyone gets a couple of minutes so that they can, provide their comments or ask a question or something, so that we're making sure we're going around the room. You could even do a progressive stack so that if someone has asked a few questions already, they can ask more questions, but they go kind of at the bottom of the list. If someone new comes in, you want to make sure that the new people get a chance to be heard before somebody who's already been commenting and talking all night, right? So there's different ways to do that we can talk about, but just be conscious. I think it's even a bullet point here, right? Be conscious of who's speaking and who has a chance to speak, and make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to participate and share their point of view.
Exactly. And if we go to the next slide, when we're talking about stacking and things of that nature, when we actually run that session, we need to have a better understanding of what that means also. Because again, this is not a meeting, but we can do similar things like we do at meetings with the stack, having a facilitator, have a timekeeper, and maybe have a sign in at the end of the meeting and everything. But the facilitator is important. It could be the same person throughout the whole reading for that particular reading. It could be different facilitators each meeting also. I'm a big fan of that. That way you don't have one person facilitating all the time. But
actually, sorry, AJ.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump in real quick there and say, I would actually encourage having rotating facilitators each meeting, because part of the goal of these reading groups is for us to learn, and it's not just learning knowledge in our brains, it's also learning these skills, and facilitating in these leadership roles and all is also a skill. So it would be great for everyone in the reading group to get that practice at being a facilitator and being in that sort of role. And, just understanding how the process works and kind of being at the front of the show. It feels different when you're actually there as opposed to talking about it. So it's good to have the experience. And we can even use these groups for experience and learning about other things. For example, if you're trying to set reading groups or something like that, or I'm sorry, not reading groups, the reading for the next meeting, I should say. Several people might throw out ideas, and AJ had mentioned earlier, maybe you could use ranked choice voting or something to decide which one comes next. Well, now you're practicing ranked choice voting. That's not something we get to do in government right now, but that's something we can learn about personally. And as we learn about it in our groups, we become more effective advocates in our communities. Oh yeah, we do this all the time in our reading group, and it's really easy. Why don't we do it for electing the mayor or something like that? This is how we learn amongst ourselves, and then as we learn, we become more confident and in teaching others in our community about it.
Yes, and again, if you haven't caught on, when we're talking about this, what we're talking about here is not just running a reading group. There's a lot of other things to help each one of us to become a better person while we're doing this. We're also educating ourselves, not just about the readings, but to Garrett's point, we're educating ourselves and others, like here's how you facilitate, here's facilitation skills you need to be doing, here's what you need to be doing when it comes to a democratic decision making moment.
Public speaking.
Exactly. Even public speaking, you know, there's more to this than just the reading. There's a lot of education that's happening, going on. And this is important to have a, well, I'll get into it a little bit later on, but I digress. But so the other important thing, besides facilitation, is that the timekeeper, well, it's important. I mean, it's optional. It really is. But if you have a big group, say on a Zoom call of, say, 20, a timekeeper might be an essential thing, you know, not just keeping a timekeeper for the person speaking, but a timekeeper for that Q&A portion or the discussion portion of your session and everything. So that's something to consider. So if we go to the next slide. And when we start doing your session, you know, make it fun. You know, doesn't have to be this very serious. I'm like, so we're going to be learning about Paulo Freire, pedagogy of the oppressed. Make it fun. You know, have an icebreaker in there. Just have a conversation with folks in there and everything, and kind of insert that along the way. Because again, this is not what we learn in school or even whatever education that we've done and everything. This is something very informal, very grassroots, you know. So I mean, having fun with this is vital in education. You know, and also during your sessions, try to make sure you have a sign-up sheet or some sort of way to get contacts for new folks who come, or even those who come to your group. Make sure you have that sign-up sheets so you have an idea who's going to be coming next week as well. So with the next slide that'll be coming up, is that new member, or if not new members, coming to your group and everything. So when we have new people, again, it's just like meetings, you know, have someone greet them before as well as after your session. Have that 10-15 minute conversation with them, with that new member and everything. Make sure that they understand who they are, why they came, you know, and learn from them as to, you know, what they may like to see when they come to a group like this. You know, ask those kind of good questions, you know, even what they're involved in. You know, are they involved with a certain group? Are they involved with a project locally? So this is not an interrogation session. This is more, again, as organizers, you know, we kind of do these one-on-ones to learn about folks and use that to our benefit to help us understand what the next readings are going to be, or what the kind of group that we have and everything. So this is part of that organizing. You know, when we do the education piece, there's that organizing piece, and we have that new member come in, and you just learn that they learn about your group because of something that's on Facebook, then that could help you with the publicity a little bit more. If they learned about you because of an action you did, that could help you also about the actions you want to do in your area. So yeah, it's really important engaging new members that way. And how have you guys engaged new members, Garrett?
It's definitely always very important to be very friendly and welcoming at the beginning. If you see a new member, like, you know, in our proposed like 2-hour-long schedule that you can roughly follow, the first 10-15 minutes is just kind of mingling and saying hi. And it's important for the facilitator and the main people running the group to go introduce themselves to all the new people and say, hi, I'm so and so, I'm co-chair of the party and stuff, and make sure that they feel welcome and that that they feel they have the opportunity to participate and to speak, because that'll be what keeps people coming back. That they feel like they're learning something, they feel welcome there, they feel comfortable there. That's all very important. And I think it helps a lot if you have like icebreaker type questions. If you can maybe, when you go around and ask everyone to introduce yourselves, for example, at the beginning of the meeting, you could ask some sort of fun question, for example, about, what's your favorite food, or, whatever it is you feel like, again, to kind of just make it more welcoming. And then afterward, you want to thank everyone for coming, and best you can have those one-on-one conversations like AJ was talking about. So it's more complicated under a pandemic, of course, but ideally, you might have like a potluck in the park or something like that, or you might meet at a restaurant or bar or something to have drinks afterward. Keep it fun. These are not meant to be formal meetings. It should be just the community coming together and getting to know each other and talking about issues in the community. And you could do that while you're having fun. You could do that while sharing some food, or playing some game or something like that. So I think just keep it a little bit more lighthearted, and people are more interested to participate. And of course, if it's the same time every month, if you say the first Monday of every month or something like that, then it starts to become something people look forward to. Like, oh yeah, that the first Monday of every month, I go hang out with the Greens and we have some fun, and then we talk about issues, and and that's really how you build things. That you're building that solidarity and trust between each other as you get to know each other. And when you have the solidarity and the trust, you can really engage in some really powerful actions.
Yes, and that's what it's all about, right? We're trying to build a solidarity. That we're trying to show people that Greens do have fun. It's not just about the meetings. We also do these fun education things, and that's very important. If we go to the next slides, it's the last slide. These are just examples. So like the three examples on here, two of which I participate in. One of them I founded in my area. So these are three different groups. The Leftist Unity Study Group I just mentioned earlier, and hopefully still on here. Joshua Bradley, he's the one who get that group up and going down there in North Carolina. That's a really fun group to go to. You can see what they do there. The Madison Free School, that's up at Madison, Wisconsin. It's a very informal thing where people just come and they kind of side with the group as to what the discussion want to be. And then from there, it's kind of more of a round robin, like open forum discussion type of thing. If someone wants to lead the conversation, they can, but it's very informal with them, and sometimes they work out of the Social Justice Center on Willie Street there in Madison, but they also do stuff on Zoom because of the pandemic and everything. But in the middle is something I started in my area, this Quad City Radical Study Group, and we kind of did this because we wanted to cultivate a radical culture in my area. Unlike Chicago, where I used to live, as well as Milwaukee, they have like an activist culture. My area doesn't have that kind of culture at all, so we had to kind of cultivate that. We have a Discord group where we kind of make decisions on there. And we do very short articles. We do zines. Sometimes we just show YouTube videos, maybe clips from movies, depending on what we're doing. And we choose a facilitator each time who's going to facilitate that topic. And then has shown success in the last 4 or 5 years. We've done that now. And now it's something that people want to be a part of now. And we kind of use that now to kind of link in folks to, get with this union group. Oh, get with this immigration rights group now. And there is a local DSA chapter. Also, maybe go with them if that's something you would like to do also. Or work with some of the local Greens. So these are some examples. And again, they're on the GSTOP website as well. All of this is on the GSTOP website as a resource. So you can always go back to that and everything. Garrett, talk a little bit about the group or two that you've been involved with and how they're similar or different from these groups.
Yeah, the most recent reading group I was involved in earlier this year was a little bit more focused on grassroots democracy and green politics, and because of the pandemic, we decided to put it on Zoom. But we met every couple of weeks on Zoom. There was a article that came up first. I put out an article for people to read a week ahead of time with a little reading list. And we get together and very similar to what the Leftist Unity group does. There'd be kind of an introduction, and then we kind of let people throw in their own analysis. And not only their own analysis of that particular article, but to link it to what we're seeing locally in our local politics. And that engaged a lot of interesting discussion about how we can implement grassroots democracy better within our local organizations. And kind of as I had mentioned earlier, we use that as an opportunity to teach ourselves about what does real democracy look like, because we don't really have democracy in the U.S. We have this representative oligarchy thing that's like not even really democracy. So we kind of have to teach ourselves democracy. We're not actually going to learn it from the system that exists today. So within these reading groups and transferring it to our organizations that we're part of, we can learn more from it. And so I think it was pretty successful and great.
Thank you for sharing that, because the one thing I wanted to illustrate, is that these reading groups and discussion groups don't have to be the same at all. Make it your own. And that's the one thing I'm going to really emphasize is make it your own, not just like your local. It could be something that everyone's really driven about. If your group is really driven about decolonization, maybe do something around decolonization. If it's about Black Lives Matter, then do something around Black Lives Matter. So really try and make it more unique for yourself. Because like I said, the groups I was involved with, all three of those are vastly different from one another, and they don't have to be that. Even Gary provided what he's shown also, that they're not what we do with that and what have you. So yeah, that's our chat for now, and just kind of looking through the questions and comments here. I'm glad everyone is joining us this afternoon, wherever you're at. I do see Josh here. And yeah, so Josh talks about a living document is helpful. And what Josh is referring to is with the Left Unity Study Group is they have a Google Doc, and during their session, they keep an actual, so that living document, someone is taking notes during that session, and there's questions, answers, and it's that living document, so they can go back to that. So they talk about Luxembourg's Reform or Revolution texts, they can go back to that, and that can be ongoing as well. If people want to go back to that same reading, they can see that and maybe add on to it, or someone wants to go back to it, I have a question about this, or here's my thoughts on that, because I think it has to be, you can do something like that as well. And the other question I'm seeing here is with Jeannie, I think what to do with saboteur disruption should be decided in advance. Yeah, so that's really important with those that new member, right? So when we have that new member, it's also important to have that one-on-one conversation with that new member to not only understand who they are, but kind of get a feel as to, Garrett, I really like this person who came here, but my spidey sense thinks that, you know, they're with the Chicago police, and here's why, you know, just of what they said, you know, because it does happen from time to time. You know, you may have that person who might be coming here just to disrupt, and we have those disruptors who infiltrate our groups, you know, just to do that, you know. And this is from my personal experience, you know, even the one who's a little bit more expressive saying, I'm a libertarian, I just want to see what you're all doing and everything. I mean, I'm still keeping an eye out, saying, okay, I see you, but do you understand where you're at? You know, so that's why it's important to talk about those things and see what to do and everything. Garrett, how would you handle someone who's a disruptor in one of your groups?
Oh, I think that's where it's important to have the ground rules. That if the group kind of from the beginning has a good sense of the ground rules, you know, the facilitator together with the group can take action on this sort of thing, and warn people. You know, please respect, you know, the stack, for example. Please respect other people's opinions, and if it gets serious enough, you might even try to eject them from the meeting. You know. It can get tricky, to be honest.
No, it really can. But that's where, again, when we have, you know, this is a group thing, right? This is not a one person doing this group. You know, if you have, you know, people there who's starting this group, you know, have to have that conversation as to, like, what do we do? You know, I'm not seeing any other questions. There's like a lot of good comments in here. Even again, Joshua Bailey once again shows about possibly use Reddit. I have to be honest. I don't use Reddit as much. I understand Reddit lingo, but that's the extent of my thing. But for those who are Reddit savvy, I can see how Reddit can be another platform to utilize to attract folks and everything. Garrett, do you use Reddit?
Yeah, I do. I do use Reddit. There's actually a Green Party subreddit. If people want to check that out, I think it's just r/Green Party. Although I think a few states and others have subreddits too, as well as the Young Eco-Socialist, which is the youth caucus of the Green Party, has its own subreddit. So those are places that you might post announcements. If you're starting a new reading group, you might post an announcement there, and it might pick up a few people. There's other like topic focused subreddits on socialism, for example, that you might want to go look at. And, you know, depending on their rules, you don't want to step on any community's rules, of course, but you might be able to post announcements there as well and recruit people into your group. But if you're getting a new group off the ground, you probably want to try to start with kind of local Green Party members or you know, people in your circle somehow connected through organizations, so that you're setting those ground rules and all that, so that you're kind of prepared just in case there is a disruptor or whatever. If you kind of cast too wide of a net at first, I think it can be more difficult to organize. You kind of start small and build from there.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for that, because again, not Reddit savvy. I like what Reddit does. I just need to get on that, quite honestly, and see what that community is about. And it's very important. And what's also important is to know when our next session is, which is the 15th. Is that correct, Garrett? 12th?
Oh, I should double check. Yeah, the 12th. I think it was a Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so there'll be a follow-up Zoom session where instead of this live stream format, it'll be meant to be more of the discussion group that we've been talking about this during this live stream, where we'll get together some folks to actually talk about a reading and discuss it, analyze it, ask questions, kind of link it toward our personal experiences, and just kind of illustrate all of the topics and ideas that we've brought up today.
Yeah, so, you know, check the link below to register for the next workshop at the greensocialist.net site. And, be sure to be there for that, because from hopefully here on out, we're going to show everyone like what that reading group, how to run a running group and everything, and also show you along the way other hone in other things to do with that and everything. So that's all I have. What do you got, Garrett?
I think that's probably it, unless there's more questions.
Yeah, I'm not really seeing any other questions. I saw one comment. So yeah, I mean, I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Garrett, for doing this. And
Yeah, thanks for leading, AJ.
Not a problem. I see Amy has a question really quick. We'll take one last question.
Oh, let's do it.
What do you got, Amy? I just like live streaming like this. You don't do this on a podcast as often. Wait for the question to come up a little bit.
Yeah, no problem, baby.
Here we go. When you started with your first group, what was the biggest misgiving, and how did you overcome it? That's a very good question. I would say for me, with my first group, I think the biggest misgiving, honestly, was assuming that people knew the author that we're doing, and the one was Marx, and I'm trying to understand. I want to say it was Capital by Marx. I want to say was that book. And again, I thought everyone knew Marx because they were all leftists. And it's like, we haven't read Manifesto. I'm like, let's go back to the beginning. It's like that first album, let's go back to the start and then come back, So yeah, this again goes back to his assumptions. Like, don't assume everyone knows authors or public intellectuals. They may have heard names before. Fanon, Chomsky, Nader, Luxembourg, Butler, they may have heard these names, but never read their stuff, So, like, let's not assume that someone has read their stuff before and everything. So that was one of the biggest misgivings for me. What about you, Gary?
Yeah. And to kind of add on to your point real quick, not everyone is necessarily familiar with all the details of these readings.
Yeah.
And even if they recognize the names, sometimes in reading newspaper, magazine articles or whatever, that particular journalist isn't very familiar with their writings. And so will misunderstand or misinterpret, and then they write something and then other people read it and now they have a misunderstanding or misinterpretation. And so it can get complicated. So it's important to make sure that you're starting from the beginning. And I think one thing that I think of is maybe ideally you almost need kind of two parallel tracks, not to create more work for anyone, but you almost need to have like a regularly reoccurring like beginner sequence of a few readings or something to get new people on board, at the same time as having this ongoing more intermediate advanced thing for people who have read the manifesto, for example, who don't need to start over there again, but there's always more to learn and read about.
Right.
In terms of my personal things, you might not be able to tell from me talking like this, but I actually get nervous in big groups of people in public speaking. And so I think probably the biggest hurdle to me with starting groups is getting really excited and then having kind of jitters the night before. Like, oh my goodness, what did I just sign myself up for? Am I really? What am I going to do about this?
Yes.
And I just, the best way to handle that, I think, is, just be prepared. Make sure you know what article you're going to read. Print out the night before sign-up sheets and all that stuff, and just make sure that you have everything together so that you're not feeling anxious about last minute putting things together. And then keep in mind that your first meeting, especially, is not supposed to be some big formal thing. You're not teaching a university class or anything like that. Nobody has any giant expectations on you. It's just people with similar interests. People who want to learn more, who want to be more involved in their communities, who want to meet other people who want to be involved in their communities. And so, keep in mind that it doesn't have to be all that serious. And if it helps a lot with the first meeting, that might be the perfect time that you do the picnic in the park or meet at a restaurant or something like that, to keep it as informal and as comfortable as possible, so that when you're meeting new people, it's not so scary. You're just meeting your neighbors, you're meeting your friends. It's not a big deal. And if you can kind of keep it calm like that, you can keep it going. And as nervous as you feel, just, from my personal experience, as nervous as you feel, once it gets started, that nervousness goes away. You have to just make yourself go through it. And if you can get to that point, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. So yeah, be sure you register for the next workshop, which is at the link below here at the greensocialist.net site. We look forward to every single one of you to come to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. So again, thank you all for your questions. Thank you, Garrett, for being here. And Chris, who you can't see, is behind the screen here doing all this and everything. We thank you for doing this as well, and everyone here at GSOP and what have you. Thank you. What's that? With that, let's call it a day.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
All right.